Hello, folks. Kenn Rashad, HBCU Sports, as we prepare to cover the upcoming MEAC SWAC Challenge against Jackson State and South Carolina State. I'm joined by HBCU Sports Senior Editor Kendrick Marshall, HBCU Sports Special Contributor Chris Stevens, and HBCU Sports Special Contributor Jarrett Hoffman. Gentlemen, thank you for joining me today. This is a very, very special time of year where everyone who is a fan of not necessarily HBCU sports or HBCU football, but just college football in general, who have maybe those teams that they follow and they're diehard. That they're hoping that if they had a bad season last year, they're cautiously optimistic for a good season. And those teams who had great seasons last year, those fans are obviously optimistic, hoping that they can continue. And I'm guessing somewhere around week 3 or 4 of the season of the college football season, we'll have some idea as to what type of teams we all follow. But hey, we are all optimistic right here in week 0. And like I said, Jackson State, South Carolina State tonight, 7:30 Eastern on ABC, nationally televised. And this is a rematch of the 2021 Celebration Bowl between the two teams, in which obviously Deion Sanders was the head coach at Jackson State at the time. Buddy Pugh was the head coach. And now the storylines have changed. Jackson State has a new head coach in T.C. Taylor. And then, of course, Buddy Pugh recently announced on Thursday that he's going to call it quits at the end of the season. So I'd like to get you guys your perspective on this matchup, as well as some perspective on the upcoming season, and even to kind of dig a little deeper into the announcement of Buddy Pugh indicating that he's going to retire. But Kendrick, I'd like to start off with you and get your thoughts as to what we can expect, not only in this game between Jackson State and South Carolina State, but just some introductory thoughts about the upcoming college football season.
As far as the game is concerned, it's going to be a lot of unknowns. I mean, Jackson State, they completely turned over their roster. They have like 70 new players. 19 of them are FBS transfers. First-year head coach T.C. Taylor is going to be his first game as head coach at the college level. Buddy Pugh, as you mentioned before, he announced his retirement 2 days ago, and we don't know how the team is going to respond to that. They're coming off a season, South Carolina State, where they only won 3 games. And so we're going to have to see like how they respond to that. They have Corey Fields back at quarterback, who is their leader. He's a 5th-year senior. This is last year in the program. So we're going to see like what kind of team South Carolina State is. And more importantly, we're going to see like how would Jackson State make this transition from Deion Sanders and losing all of their big-time players to playing a different style of football with a whole new roster. A new quarterback's going to be announced tonight. We won't know who that is until kickoff. So it's really hard to say like who's going to perform a certain way or what the outcome of the game is going to be, because we just don't know too much about either one of these teams. And as far as college football moves forward is concerned, this may be the most wide open year I think that we've seen in a while. I mean, JSU is no longer the favorite anymore, at least on the SWAC side. North Carolina Central is going to bring back most of their roster from the championship team last year. But I think this season in MEAC and SWAC is going to be very competitive on both sides. So we should be in for a really fun season.
Chris Stevens, your thoughts on the start of the college football season, especially as it relates to HBCUs?
Pretty much piggybacking on what Kendrick said, this game is really just who is going to be able to figure out who first. Like, as a Delaware State alum, I've seen South Carolina State a ton over the last, goodness gracious, 20-plus years. And knowing that, that wing T, wishbone option offense is going to have one more year under Buddy Pugh. And getting, as Kendrick said, getting Corey Fields back, because he was hurt most of last year. That's why South Carolina State's offense, took a nosedive, because without him, they were just incredibly terrible. In the few games he did play, they beat North Carolina Central. They were the only MEAC team to do so. So I think, from this game's perspective, it's just going to be a matter of who can figure out who first. If TC's guys can, establish a tempo, some chemistry early, or if South Carolina State has just enough returners to catch them off guard once again. As far as the whole Black college football season goes, I'm going to drop a hot take here really quickly. Division II is way more interesting than Division I at this point. We don't know who's going to win the CIAA at this point. Can Bowie State come back? Is Fayetteville State a flash in the pan? Can Virginia Union actually build off the momentum from last year? Will there be a dark horse like a Johnson C. Smith or a Livingstone or an Elizabeth City State? SIAC, they went from East and West divisions to just one division this year. So there's not going to be, a East and West champion. There's going to be the top two teams playing in that championship game. So as I talked to Chennis Berry of Benedict yesterday, that story is going to go live on our website later this week, that he said that every game is a championship game in that league now, because you can't afford to lose one and okay, we can still win our division. There's no more division to win. So you have to be on top of your game every week in the SIAC. And the question is, can anybody beat Benedict? Benedict returned 70 kids. Tuskegee's got a lot of talent. Fort Valley State and Albany State will likely have something to say about it. Dark horse for me coming out of SIAC is probably going to be Edward Waters, even though they probably won't be able to compete because they're still going through the transitional phase. So even if they win the championship, they won't be allowed to play in Division II playoffs, unfortunately. But still, Edward Waters is a team everyone should look out for. But I feel like Division II is going to be a lot more interesting than Division I at this point, because the SWAC, meanwhile, you can pinpoint teams. Jackson State's no longer the favorite, but they still have talent. FAMU, they have to. Hopefully, they've gotten over the whole music video thing that happened over there. I still think Southern's pretty good. I think Prairie View and Texas Southern, will have something to say about that in the Western Division. And in the East, you can't look past Jackson State still. You can't look Florida A&M. Alabama State is probably going to be a very good team as well. So, granted, Division I has some interest to it, but I feel like Division II is going to be a dogfight in both conferences from start to finish. So it should be an exciting year on the, I guess we'll call it, lower level.
I know Jarrett has kind of been our de facto Division II expert, and I'm interested to hear what his comments are based upon his experience with D2, his experience reporting on D2 teams. You agree with anything that Chris has said so far, Jarrett?
Oh, I agree with everything that Chris said. This is a very exciting CIAA season. Fayetteville State, coming off of winning the CIAA championship for the first time since 2009. They had been in the CIAA championship game 4 straight years and hadn't been able to get over the hump, and they finally got over the hump. They're returning most of their guys. Had one of their top defensive linemen into the transfer portal this season and transferred out, and they had a guy that was going to enter the transfer portal, but he decided to return to the program, so they're going to be exciting to watch. Virginia Union is going to be exciting to watch. Jada Byers, transcended HBCU football and staked his claim to be not only the top running back in HBCU football, but in Division II football as a whole. So I'm excited to see how he develops as a player. Bowie State has a nice group of defensive backs that I'm excited to see their development. One name to look out for is Keith Williams. As a freshman, he had, I believe, 3 interceptions. So I'm excited to see how he develops as a player. Virginia State is a team that was one of the leaders in takeaways last year. So I'm excited to see how that young defense develops, and the CIAA North is going to be very fun to watch. Bluefield State, is coming into the conference, making it an all HBCU conference once again. The CIAA South, I'm excited to see Shaw in action, and I don't want to just leave it all to the CIAA. You see the hat, Bowie State alum, but I'll give SIAC some love. As Chris said, I'm excited to see Fort Valley State. They don't have Emmanuel Wilson right now. He's playing with the Green Bay Packers at the moment, but they're still going to be a contender in that SIAC East. Albany State, they just transitioned in a new head coach, so I'm excited to see how if they're able to get back to the top of the SIAC. Benedict, winning their first conference championship in school history. The SIAC West is going to be very wide open. Tuskegee is absolutely going to be the favorite. But do not count out Kentucky State. Do not count out Lane. They're going to have something to say about it. So I absolutely agree with Chris. This is going to be a fun Division II football season.
Okay. So we hadn't really talked about it during our meeting prior to recording, but you know what? Since we're on the subject, let's kind of take a little dive into each of the teams. So we've addressed the Division II teams, but let's take a look at the MEAC in terms of what we can expect. I believe North Carolina Central is the favorite to win the conference, but are there any possible surprises that we could possibly anticipate during the course of the season that could possibly be somewhat of a challenge or a contender for North Carolina Central, possibly not repeating as MEAC champions? Kendrick, who Chris, you want to, you know what, you're the MEAC guy. How about you take a stab at it?
I think people are looking past Morgan State at their own risk. Damon Wilson the culture's changed. I mean, they finished 4-7 last year, but it was a 4-7 that included a demolition of South Carolina State. They beat Towson. They beat Sacred Heart. They gave Towson a really good game. This is a team that, needed a culture shift even after making not Division II, the FCS playoffs way back in 2014. And of course, Jarrett knows Coach Wilson very well. He knows what that man is capable of. So now that he's, brought his attitude and recruiting skills to Division I, that Morgan State team is going to be a lot better than people give them credit for. Howard is, like I told Jarrett earlier this week, Howard didn't blow me away last year. And, maybe, with the improved running back situation, maybe they will be better, but I still feel like that people are looking past Morgan State, not just as a runner-up, but as a contender for the MEAC. And probably if they have a strong enough record, say 8-3-ish, which I think is absolutely attainable for them, they could be a representative in the FCS playoffs. So I feel like Morgan State's going to be the one surprise. I feel like the only other one that I could possibly point to is that South Carolina State has a rebound year to send Coach Pugh out, on the win one for the Gipper type of deal. So that could be it. But I feel like North Carolina Central is just head and shoulders above everybody else. They got Davius Richard, the quarterback, who should be, the first quarterback taken, HBCU quarterback taken in draft since Tavares Jackson, God rest his soul. So I feel like, that Central team with everybody they return on offense and defense is literally just going to have to stay healthy, and they should win the MEAC again.
Kendrick?
Yeah, I agree. Morgan State is a team that's dangerous. As Chris mentioned, and I know Jared knows, Damon Wilson has completely changed the coach of their program so far. I think they're going to contend for the MEAC championship. I know Howard was picked second, but Howard, a lot of people think that their success last year was based a little bit on luck. And when they faced North Carolina Central, they got blown away by 40 points, which kind of proved to everybody that, hey, maybe they're maybe a year or two away from really contending for the championship. But Larry Scott, he has a program in the right direction. He has them contending. The big game for them is going to be that North Carolina Central game. That's going to be in D.C. this year in October. That will ultimately, I think, decide if Morgan State is not in the middle of it, who's going to win the MEAC. South Carolina State, you always got to pay attention to them. Under Buddy Pugh, like I said at the top, we don't know how they're going to respond to Buddy Pugh announcing that he's going to retire at the end of the season. They may be extra motivated to try to send him out on top. So I think those three teams, North Carolina Central, Morgan State, and Howard, will probably decide the MEAC this year.
The one thing that I was actually waiting to see if anybody was going to mention, and I've noticed, granted, Delaware State has had its struggles, but I'm surprised no one has mentioned anything. Didn't mean that wasn't a personal knock, Chris, but I mean,
I know.
Facts are facts, right? So the program has had its struggles, but I'm surprised no one has said anything about Norfolk State and the direction that it's gone in since Dawson Odoms had taken over. What do you guys attribute to what Norfolk State is currently going through right now? Why aren't we talking about them? I mean, obviously, they based upon the results, there isn't really a whole lot to talk about. But I think it was safe to say that when Dawson Odoms took over that program, there were some pretty high anticipation in terms of what people were expecting out of that program. What happened? What went wrong, or what's going wrong?
To me, it feels like, for one, you've got a guy who's coming from a conference that does things a whole different way than how the MEAC does it across the board. Like the SWAC, I mean, the results on the field may say something different, and we've already run a story about how Charles McClellan feels like the SWAC gauntlet is a lot tougher than the MEACs, and that's why the Celebration Bowl and the MEAC SWAC Challenge hasn't worked out in their favor necessarily. But the MEAC is so short-handed at this point. There are only 6 football playing schools that it's just more difficult to get kids to buy into the MEAC as a solvent conference on a football scale. And that's probably what Coach Odoms is struggling with. He's just not getting the same kids that he did, at Southern, because granted, you've got Louisiana, Mississippi, Arkansas, Texas, right around that, right around course, and in Louisiana. You're going to get some talented kids there. Football in the Northeast is still, it's okay, but the kids from Virginia, DC, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, they're not the same as the kids in Texas, Mississippi, Louisiana, Arkansas, and Tennessee to the Northeast. It's not the same thing. And that has been the struggle for them. Also, their defense was terrible last year. Their defense bottomed out literally in every single statistical category: rushing defense, pass defense, points allowed, touchdowns allowed. That's going to be where it starts for them. If they can improve on defense, they'll have a better chance this year. But that team is still at least 2 or 3 years away from competing. And I don't know if Coach Odoms is going to have the patience for that rebuilding project, or if the Norfolk State brass is going to have the patience to rebuild. But when you think about the MEAC being, 6 schools, it could, we talked about the SIAC being a championship every week. The MEAC gets a championship every week. So one loss here and there, you could be in it. So it all depends on how his team approaches this season, see how it goes.
The MEAC being a 16 football conference is something that that still boggles my mind when you put in consideration that the exodus of schools that left for whatever reason or another, going back to when, Savannah State made the announcement that they were going back down to Division II. And it's just, FAMU, Bethune-Cookman, A&T, Hampton. And I know this is a very difficult question, but when you put in consideration what we've seen recently in conference realignment, whether it be at the FCS level or at the Power 5 level, if you're the MEAC commissioner, what do you do? I know there was talk at one point of the possibilities of Virginia State possibly being considered, or possibly doing some sort of an exploratory study as to whether or not it was feasible to make that move. I remember we reported probably, maybe a year or two ago about the possibility of Virginia State and Kentucky State. I just don't see how Kentucky State could possibly make that move given where they are geographically. If you're the commissioner, what do you do to expand the league and to possibly attract more schools?
If we're talking strictly from an HBCU standpoint, I think that ship has sailed. With the way that the money has grown, what's the word I'm looking for? Inflated so quickly. Because I remember when I was researching for the MEAC SWAC series that I did this summer, a FCS program in 1995 was a $4 million budget. That has increased 6 times in the last 28 years. Wow. Now, if we're talking about, we're talking about programs that are already, as my grandmother used to say, robbing Peter to pay Paul. So if we're talking about schools that are already struggling, and Division II level is where a Virginia State is comfortable, a Bowie State is comfortable, a Kentucky State is comfortable. It's going to be hard to ask them to give that up, especially considering that there is an all-out attack on Black education in this country. And I hate to, go off the sports path a little bit, but it all ties in. Because when you see, people banning books, people banning, Black history and all of these things, if they're not happy with, people wanting to learn about Black people. They don't want Black people to learn, period. And that means HBCUs have to be really careful how they navigate, staying open and staying alive and staying solvent. And that means athletic delusions of grandeur are probably going to have to be put to the side. So while Virginia State has these beautiful facilities, I think Virginia State has a better gym than at least half of the MEAC basketball schools. So I mean, the facilities wouldn't.
And they've got something like what 14 or 15 varsity programs in the sport, if I'm not mistaken, right? I mean, they've got quite a few programs in that athletic department.
Yes, they just added men's and women's lacrosse and women's soccer this year. Wow. Women's soccer will be making their debut in about a week or so. So Virginia State. I mean, when you kind of connect the dots, you feel like they're trying to see if they can make it happen. But I would think that President Abdullah, who's a very astute individual, just wouldn't throw the health and safety of his university in jeopardy just to join the MEAC. So if we're talking from an HBCU standpoint, I don't see how it happens. And of course, Tennessee State and the remaining schools in Ohio Valley have partnered with Big South. So maybe what I think could happen is that the MEAC partners with the Northeast Conference because they've already had a working relationship for God knows how long anyway. So that could be a point, even though it's not from an HBCU perspective, it's not a popular option, but it might be the safest option at this point.
And a viable option at that too, right?
Absolutely, because when you think about most of the MEAC schools, because I'll never forget when Florida A&M announced that they were leaving the MEAC, their athletic director at the time said that we're tired of taking trips to Dover, Delaware, and as a Delaware State alum, I found that to be a little off-putting, but I get the point because it's not cheap to travel, and it's not cheap to travel from Tallahassee and Daytona Beach to fly into Philadelphia International, then drive an hour down the road to Dover. So I get where a lot of these programs in the South are saying. So when you think about it, everybody from at least half of the conference, Coppin, Morgan, UMES, and Del State are in the I-95 corridor. So they could, make those trips up to Wagner and Central Connecticut and Merrimack and all of that. So it would just depend on how people would respond to that. But, a MEAC Northeast partnership for football seems like the safest and most solvent bet at this point.
Right. So still a lot remains to be seen with the direction that the MEAC is going to take with respect to, possible expansion or partnership with another conference. But that is something that I think at some point, probably within the next year or two, we will probably get more answers in terms of the direction that the conference is going to take, which leads us to the SWAC. And of course, 12 teams and an interesting storyline with each, obviously, as is the case with pretty much any team at this point. But, what can we anticipate? The favorites are FAMU out of the East, and who's out of the West?
Southern's a favorite in the West. It's voted by the
right. So Southern and FAMU are anticipated to be the two representatives in this SWAC championship game. But what are you guys' initial takes on what we could possibly expect from the SWAC this year? Anybody feel free to Kendrick, you first.
Yeah, I think the SWAC West is a side of the conference we all need to pay attention to because I know Southern's the favorite, but I think a lot of people are sleeping on Alcorn State. I think they have just as good a chance as anybody on that side to win the division. This is going to be their first year, Ken, of having a normal football season. They didn't play in 2021 because of COVID. Then they got penalized. They had to play most of their games on the road the next season. And now they have a balanced schedule. And I talked to Fred McNair about that. He said, we mentioned how this season is going to be normal for us. We're going to be better prepared for the season. We know what to expect this season. So that will help. Also having Javion Howard as their running back helps too. He burst on the scene last year. Is all SWAC running back. He should contend for Offensive Player of the Year in the conference this year. If they can figure out who their quarterback is, and they always had a good defense, I think they could really challenge Southern on that side of the SWAC. I know people are going to mention Texas Southern with Andrew Body, but they haven't just been able to be consistent enough to think like this will be the year that they will finally live up to all that potential and hype. So I think it's going to be in Grambling, your school, Ken. Like they also battling with the quarterback issue. They don't know who their guy's going to be. Maybe it's Julian Calvez. Maybe it's Miles Crawley, who transferred from Alabama State. We don't know there. So we'll see. But I think it's going to be Alcorn and Southern at the end who's going to compete for the SWAC West Championship.
Jarrett?
I definitely agree that the SWAC West is the star of the show. You know, if Southern is the favorite, it's by this much. You know what I mean? Wow. Texas Southern. I know Kendrick said that they're gonna have an uphill battle to get over the hump, but I think they have a nice running back duo with Ladarius Owens and Ja'Cory Howard to go along with Andrew Body, who is a dual threat quarterback. You know, so I think the players to watch for Texas Southern is the receivers. You know, I think if the receivers are able to give Andrew Body that ability to be a better in the passing game, you know, that give that offense a dimension to where they can go over the top and they can be able to contend. You know, I think the one problem I have with Texas Southern is that they lost their leading defensive back, Isaiah Hamilton. You know, he transferred to Houston. So he was their leading defensive back, had 5 interceptions or something like that last season. So I think the defense is going to have trouble, you know, recovering from what he brought. But I think one team we haven't mentioned is Prairie View A&M. You know, I think their quarterback Trayvon Connolly had quietly one of the best seasons from last year. Had 11 passing touchdowns, had 13 rushing touchdowns, which was second in the SWAC last season. So, and they brought in Caleb Johnson from Mississippi Valley State, and they brought Brian Jenkins Jr. from Alabama A&M. So I think they're going to be a player, but don't sleep on the SWAC East now. You know, I think.
Yeah, I was going to say, so because you say you think, who was it? Southern's going to only possibly by this much of possibly winning the SWAC West, but I'm saying what about the SWAC East? Because you've got, you know, I get it, FAMU's is favorite, but you've got, you know, J-State, you've got Alabama State and Alabama A&M, and I think what makes those programs even more unique is the fact that we've got coaches who are, you know, they've got their own unique personality and egos, if you will. I mean, I get the talk with the SWAC West, but you know, is FAMU clearly the overwhelming favorite to where there's no possible chance of an upset or someone upending them?
Don't get me wrong. The Florida A&M is definitely the favorite, you know, and it's by a distance, but not as much of a distance as maybe people think. You know, Alabama State last year was quietly one of the best defensive teams in the conference. You know, they don't have their star defender Keenan Isaac anymore. You know, but I think Eddie Robinson is setting a culture in Alabama State of defensive toughness and aggressiveness and playmaking. You know what I mean? I think they're going to be just as good this season. You know, they have a young star in Adrian Maddox, who I think will look to take the next step and become, you know, one of the top players in the conference this year. You know, I think Jackson State, even with all the unknowns, they have some talented players. You know, their running back J.D. Martin could potentially have a breakout season this year. Asias Guthrie, who's returning to the football field after transferring from Delaware State. As you can see, I was about to get to it. I saw him about to put the shirt up. Yeah. I think he's gonna have a very good season. You know, with all the quarterback mystery that's going on there, we'll see how those guys are able to perform. You know, but I think Jackson State is definitely a team that could get to the top of the SWAC East and potentially even win the conference this year. You know, Alabama A&M, they said at SWAC Media Day they're guaranteeing that they're going to win the SWAC. So they got to have that confidence somewhere. They got a nice young running back from Michigan State who transferred from Michigan State, Donovan Eaklund. You know, they have some talented players. They have some talented players on their defense. So I'd say yes, Florida A&M is definitely the favorite, but the rest of the SWAC is going to have something to say about it.
Wow. So we've covered all the conferences at the Division II and Division I level. So let's go ahead and talk about this game tonight between Jackson State and South Carolina State. And and look, we'll get into the matchup itself, but here is one thing that I also want to take the time to address that I'm not going to say it bothers me. Maybe it does because I am a product of a SWAC institution. But I think we all know that whether it be the MEAC SWAC Challenge, whether it be the Celebration Bowl, or whether it just be regular season matchups between a MEAC and a SWAC school, the MEAC has pretty much had the SWACs banned for some time now, and this isn't anything recent. I want to say that I read or heard someone say that they broke down like the matchups between SWAC and MEAC matchups over a certain period of time, and the MEAC just they were favored for all of the attention that the SWAC gets. And I guess the South being what it is when it comes to college football, the MEAC, like I said, has had the SWAC's number. Why do you think that is? And what is it that the SWAC teams are doing or what is it that the MEAC teams are doing that the SWAC teams aren't? And is there really anything to the matchups? I mean, is it just good luck, or is there something to be said for the quality of football that the MEAC is playing versus the SWAC? Anyone feel free to chime in.
People came down on Commissioner Charles McClellan for his statement at SWAC Media Day about why the SWAC is struggling in these interconference matchups. But the numbers bear him out. When you think about 12 institutions and you're probably going to play 8 or 9 in a conference setting, you're getting everyone's best every week, because it's just one of my favorite Richard Pryor jokes, and of course I'm going to keep it clean because this is a family show. One of my favorite Richard Pryor jokes is when he's talking about how great Muhammad Ali is, and he said that Joe Frazier will just not fall down for Muhammad Ali. That's how it is in the SWAC. You just can't wake up and one day and say, okay, we're the best team in the SWAC, because Alcorn State's going to look out the side of their eyes like, really? FAMU's like, nah, you're not. Even down to Arkansas, Pine Bluff, and Mississippi Valley are just tired of being beat up on. They're going to be the kid that's getting their lunch money taken by the bully every week, and they're finally going to say, no, you're not taking my lunch money every week. So when you think about 12 versus 6, it makes it very easy, to call it a built-in excuse, but it's a fact. The SWAC is just a deeper conference, more talent, better coaching, better atmosphere. The MEAC, as much as I love that conference, is not what it was when I was a student at Delaware State. It's just not. So when you think about, you have 6 football playing schools and maybe one would be competitive from a FCS playoff standpoint. Not too much you can do.
But Chris, but look at the numbers though. The MEAC, right? The SWAC is a deeper conference, and granted, 2 of those teams came from the MEAC. I get that, but the head-to-head matchups don't lie. I mean, the SWAC sends its best to the Celebration Bowl, and regardless of what the matchup may be, it always appears that the MEAC has always gets the best of the SWAC team. Now, I will say this. Charles McClellan, when he made the comment about the preparation time, I really do believe there's something to be said about that. You got the SWAC championship game, and then of course, that game determines who's going to participate in the Celebration Bowl, and then you literally got a week to prepare for that matchup. Whereas the MEAC representative, depending on when their season ends, if I'm not mistaken, I want to say 1 week the Celebration Bowl. I want to say that there was a team that only had like 3 weeks to prepare, if I'm not mistaken. So I think there is something to be said. So if you got with the MEAC team, if you've got something, a situation where you've got some nagging injuries and you've got 3 weeks to prepare for that, well, opposed to a team that just played the week prior in the SWAC championship game, and you may have some injuries, and you stand a possible chance of maybe having some players who may not necessarily be in the position to play or may not be 100%. Granted, it comes with the territory. But I will say this, even if you take the Celebration Bowl out of it, and all you got to do is just look at the head-to-head matchups, historically speaking, with the MEAC SWAC Challenge, and the MEAC still has the better end of the SWAC teams. Now, what is it? The last, I think Jarrett wrote, 3? SWAC is one of the last 3 out of 5, right? Mm-hmm. But I think the head-to-head matchup, is it 11-5? What's the for the MEAC SWAC Challenge, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the numbers don't lie. So, which leads me into this particular matchup, a Jackson State team that has a completely revamped roster versus a South Carolina State team that, the way I see it, is coming into a game that's going to be emotional. I think that Buddy Pugh knew what I think long before he made the announcement, I'm sure he had some idea over the course of the summer that this was going to be his last game. But he made the announcement 2 days before the matchup, and he made it known to the world that this is going to be my last year. And man, I just think that you can look at the head-to-heads, you can look at both rosters, but I think there's a lot to be said. There's a lot to be said for the fact that South Carolina State, I believe, has an emotional advantage going into this game because of the fact that they're going to want to win this game, not only for themselves, but obviously for Coach Pugh. Jarrett, your thoughts? Because I mean, you pretty much went in and provide head-to-heads on what each team needed to do to win. But what are your thoughts on the matchup tonight?
I think it's unknowns on both sides. I think South Carolina State, granted, has less turnover than Jackson State, but everybody has less turnover than Jackson State. But South Carolina State, the last time they played Jackson State, that game was dominated by the defensive backs. Kobe Durant, who's now with the Rams. Severe Kelly.
That game against Jackson State turned him into the NFL process.
Yeah, you look at those. You look at Shedeur Sanders' numbers in that game, and that was arguably his worst game at Jackson State. I think he passed like 16 for 36. Those defensive backs, really did a number on him. But those guys aren't there anymore. Now this game could potentially be about the defensive linemen. Octavian Mentor, Jared Kirksey, Patrick Godbolt. Those guys are going to put pressure on whoever it is under center for Jackson State. It is going to be this game is going to Jackson State's going to learn a lot. They're going to take a lot from this game. It could potentially make them better. It could potentially rattle them. Who knows? But I think this is a big test for Jackson State. It could be a litmus test for whether or not they are going to be a team that competes in the SWAC. Same thing for South Carolina State. We could learn. We're going to learn a lot from this game. This is not going to be a game that it just happens and it's in the record books. No, this is going to tell us whether or not these two teams are for real or not. And I'm very excited for it. I'm just ready. I'm ready for it to kick off. I'm so excited for it.
Kendrick, any thoughts on this on the matchup tonight?
Yeah, when Jackson State or a SWAC school has lost to a MEAC school in these particular games, they have always lost the defensive line and the offensive line. Jackson State got pushed around against South Carolina State in Celebration Bowl. You had Shedeur Sanders running for his life for much of that game. And last year in Celebration Bowl was much of the same thing. Those numbers were a little bit better than they were in 2021. But when Jackson State gets pushed up front, they have a hard time winning football games. And if South Carolina State, as Jarrett mentioned, can make a difference on the defensive line, especially, they have a chance to win. But we don't know what kind of offense Jackson State is going to run. They're going to have a new quarterback. They're going to have a plethora of new weapons. They're going to have a new starting running back. Only have one game breaker in DJ Stevens at tight end. So we don't know how the offense is going to try to move the football down the field? Will they try to do the air raid like they did under Deion Sanders, or will they go more to of additional offense, or they just have the back control the game? So we'll see. I mean, for South Carolina State, Corey Fields is going to be the guy who decides the game for them. How he plays tonight will determine their fate, pretty much to me. If he can bounce back to that 2021 form, we led them to the championship, they have a chance to win. I know Chris and Jarrett kind of varied on their picks. I know, Jarrett, you picked Jackson State to win. Chris, you picked South Carolina State to win. But I think the lines are going to determine this game from the start.
As is usually the case. Chris, any more thoughts on the matchup tonight?
Yeah, I feel like, what Jarrett and Kendrick said is pretty much, we're across the board in agreement with this, that you just don't know who's going to show up until, we know where the teams are going to show up, obviously, but, we don't know what's going to happen until, I would say, like, each team has a possession. Once we figure out who Jackson State's quarterback is going to be, if Corey Fields is healthy, if that South Carolina State defensive line can have their way with Jackson State's offensive line like they did in 2021, then it might be a problem. But if Jackson State can hold their own and then they find a game breaker within the game, then they'll have a good shot. Either way, this game is not going to be a runaway on either side, I don't think. It's going to be – it just depends on who can establish tempo first, who can, establish physicality first, as Kendrick said, because if – the trenches is where the game is won. It's been like that in football since the beginning of time, and I don't think that's going to change. So whoever wins that battle of the behemoths down there, I feel like has a chance to win that game. And that's why I picked South Carolina State, because I just feel like they're more physical, they're stronger, and they have the offense working for them where you don't know if Fields is going to hand it off, keep it himself, throw it. It's a very it's not, I wouldn't say complex, but it's definitely old school, because the wing T is a basis for that offense. And, of course, wing T originated here in Delaware, where I'm from, which was run by David Nelson and Tubby Raymond at the University of Delaware. And a lot of offensive coordinators and coaches adopted that over the last 50, 60 years. So being able to keep that option open, if you will, is going to help South Carolina State a lot tonight.
So we talked about the storylines and how this is a rematch between two teams that played against each other in the Celebration Bowl back in 2021. And as I indicated earlier, that team back in 2021 was coached by Deion Sanders. And now, of course, Buddy Pugh is announcing that he's going to retire. But I'm going to tell the story, and I told you guys this before we started recording, of an incident that took place, or of something that someone told me during last year at the Celebration Bowl, when North Carolina Central and Jackson State were playing against each other. And we were out on the field during North Carolina Central's walkthrough. And someone, an administrator from a particular school, from a particular HBCU, told me that he had a conversation with a particular coach from the NCAA, from the North Carolina Central coaching staff. And he said that the coach told him that by this time tomorrow, HBCU football as we know it will be ours once again. And that was said, we believe, due in large part because by that time, Deion Sanders had already announced that he was leaving Jackson State to become the head coach to eventually become the head coach at Colorado. I bring that story up because we are now starting an HBCU football season that no longer has Deion Sanders front and center as the head coach at Jackson State. Will things be different now that Deion Sanders is no longer with Jackson State? And or should I say, will there be any residual impact that he's gone? Because, let's face it, Jackson State got an awful lot of attention, and there was some residual impact for some other schools who were, that were featured in games in which, ESPN did College Game Day when Jackson State played Southern and so forth. Are we likely to see any of that at all this year now that Deion Sanders is no longer at Jackson State? Anyone feel free to chime in.
Well, as I said in our pre-production meeting, that for me, it felt like Deion Sanders was trying to bring his culture to Jackson State rather than integrating himself into the culture. And that's where a lot of the hard feelings came from different coaches and different observers, stakeholders, and around HBCU football and HBCU sports, period. So we're talking tonight, we focus back on the field, and two programs with sterling traditions of NFL players, cultural icons. They're all the front and center, and we're dealing with a program in South Carolina State who I feel like is the quintessential HBCU football program of making a way out of no way. I've compared them to the San Antonio Spurs in the NBA. They may not be exciting. They may not get your heart rate, up, but they are consistent, they're successful, and they do it the right way. And I guess coming back to the prime thing is that Deion Sanders is probably the greatest self-promoter not named P.T. Barnum that I've ever seen. Like, this is the same guy who literally had it in him to play in an NFL game one night and a World Series game the next. Like, This is who Deion Sanders is. And granted, that rubbed people the wrong way. So now we get to see if his whatever he brought to HBCU football can sustain itself without him. And yes, you need personalities. Yes, you need colorful characters. But at the same time, the focus has to return to the play on the field and the culture in the stands. And this is a chance for everybody to say, okay, who had a problem with Deion, this is their chance to say, okay, now he's gone. We can really show who we are and still maintain whatever boost, or as we say in the pro wrestling world, a rub, that Deion gave Black college sports.
Kendrick.
Yeah, like Chris said, like covering the Deion era in the last 3 years, I had never heard or seen tone of coaches just be so, I guess, dismissive of like the attention that Deion Sanders brought to not only JSU, but to Black college football as a whole. I remember it started with Dawson Odoms when he was at Southern. We asked him a bunch of Deion-related questions, and he was like, hey, we got a good football team too.
Right.
Like our guys are good too. And so that spring 2021 season, they played them at Jackson State and they blew them out. And they wanted to send a message like, hey, like we're not going to kowtow to Deion Sanders because of who he is and kind of what place he is in sports. And so I think like Deion's tenure at Jackson State was a great one for the university. It obviously elevated their profile for sure. It also elevated him. That's why he's at Colorado. And ultimately, like it's up to Jackson State and the rest of the schools all across the country to find a way to capitalize off that attention. We talked about this back in 2020 when the whole George Floyd thing happened and how like a lot of the mainstream, whether it was corporations, whether it was media, elsewhere, they decided to go all in on everything Black culture.
Yeah.
Like writing Black Lives Matter on the street, doing these proclamations of Black people, being more intent to our social and cultural needs. And so I think that has to happen post Deion Sanders. Is that same investment going to be there from ESPN? Is that same investment going to be there from different companies? Are we going to be featured on 60 Minutes? Are we going to be featured on College Game Day? I don't know. But it remains to be seen like how his absence will impact that in terms of like whether or not Black colleges would be in a similar spotlight that they were before. But I will say though, one thing that turned off a lot of stakeholders in Black college sports was the idea that like Deion Sanders introduced Black college sports to the public. I mean, Jackson State's been around for 100 years. Delaware State's been around a long time. Bowie State's been around a long time. People who know about these schools already knew about the schools. You could say, yeah, Deion Sanders probably did open up a little bit more of eyes to Black college sports, but he wasn't a reason for that. Like we all were the reason for that. And so like it'll be interesting to see like how the landscape kind of moves forward post his departure to Colorado.
Jarrett, your thoughts?
I think Deion Sanders left his mark. You know what I mean? Like we all know who Deion Sanders is. We know who he is since he was playing in the NFL, since he was the guy that, was the only guy to ever play in the World Series and the Super Bowl. We know him as the guy that was in the media doing music videos with MC Hammer. Like he brought all of that fame, all of that status that he rightfully earned, he brought it to Jackson State. He made the team a powerhouse for those 2 years. People are going to argue that they are one of the greatest teams in HBCU football history. We know what he brought. You know, we know that now that he's gone, everybody's going to be saying that everything that happens in HBCU football good is thanks to him. You know what I mean? But what people need to understand is that we've thrived with him, and we're going to thrive. We've thrived without him before. We're going to thrive without him now. You know, like we've had guys that have gone to the NFL and gone on to be great. Forget about the all-time greats like Jerry Rice and Walter Payton and Steve McNair. We got Shaq Leonard, who prior to his injury this past season was arguably the best linebacker in the NFL. We got Kobe Durant, who led the NFL in interception return yards. You know, we have 4 guys last year who were taken in the NFL draft. We have a bunch of guys this year who were undrafted free agents who are playing very amazingly in as NFL undrafted free agents right now in the preseason. You know, so like this notion that, you know, HBCU football is going to struggle without, you know, Deion Sanders. Granted, it's not always been great. No, but to think that we're just going to crumble and fall when we've had hundreds of years without him already, that's ridiculous. We're going to be just fine. We thank him for what he brought to HBCU football. We thank him for the appearance on College Game Day. We thank him for the 60 Minutes feature, you know, shining a light on Jackson State and Division I SWAC HBCU football. You know what I mean? We thank him for his contributions. But we as much as we're hoping that you do well in Colorado, we're not going to say like, please come back, we need you. No, we don't. No, we're going to be just fine, guys. Let's calm down. We're going to be just fine.
There were some folks in Jackson who did cry foul when he made the decision to leave and go to Colorado, but that's beside the point. Gentlemen, we got a few minutes left. I want to go back and I think I kind of got an idea of where you guys are leaning with respect to the game tonight between South Carolina State and Jackson State. But I do want to get your predictions on record. I think I'm on record saying that I don't see Jackson State winning this game. And I am a SWAC guy. Whenever a SWAC institution plays against a MEAC institution, I'm always going for the SWAC institution. But given what we saw this past Thursday in Buddy Pugh announcing that he is going to make this season his last season, I think that is going to provide his team with a little more emotional boost to get the job done and come out with another MEAC win over the SWAC. So I don't want it to happen, but I do believe South Carolina State will win tonight. Kendrick, your prediction. By the way, for those of you who aren't aware, Kendrick is a Jackson State alum, by the way. So I just want to put this out there. Tread very carefully, Kendrick Marshall. Tread very carefully with this prediction.
Yeah, I keep picking the SWAC schools in these matchups, and they don't come out very well in my favor. It's hard to pick this one because not that I'm JSU alone, but because like I got no history like of knowing how either team's gonna perform.
Yeah.
Especially at State with a whole new roster, new coach. South Carolina State, like they had a bad season. Are they gonna play the team that won 3 games last year? Or are they gonna be galvanized by the Buddy Pugh announcement and playing on the big stage and ABC in prime time and play back like how they did in 2021? So that remains to be seen, but I'm going to pick Jackson State. And the reason why is because I think people are overlooking that, yeah, they may have lost a bunch of players, and yeah, they might have overturned their roster, but they got 19 FBS transfers, one of which could be their quarterback tonight, Jason Brown, who probably will be the starter. I think that matters. I think having that level of talent on your team matters. And I think having the continuity of TC Taylor as head coach matters too. You're not trying to learn a whole different system, whole new coach, whole new personality, things like that. So I think that's going to be a difference in this game. Just the depth Jackson State has with the transfers and just the continuity with the coach is going to help them win this game tonight. And I could be wrong though, but that's kind of how I see it.
Jarrett Hoffman, who's going to win tonight?
Well, I think both teams have, added motivation to this game. We already talked about, the Buddy Poe factor for South Carolina State, but Jackson State has not won a MEAC SWAC challenge in their 2 appearances. They've lost their last 3 games against the MEAC, so they want to end that losing streak. I know they probably don't even care about it. It's probably something they don't even talk about. They just want to get a win, and that's another factor, is that they want to prove to people that, even though the Deion Sanders era is over, they're still here and they want to contend for a championship. So I don't expect this game to be a blowout on either side. I think this is going to be a very close, competitive game, and I have Jackson State winning by a field goal. I think this is going to be a very close game. I think this is going to be, like I said before, this is going to be a litmus test for both teams. And I don't think either team is going to look bad. I think there's going to be some learning curves throughout the game. We're going to see some adjustments made throughout the game. But I have Jackson State winning by a field goal.
Chris Stevens.
As the MEAC guy, I'm going to stick with my prediction of South Carolina State. We talked about before. I picked South Carolina State to win 20-13. I'm going to stick with that. Only reason I plan on sticking with that is because I feel like, as Ken alluded to earlier, that when your beloved coach, like Buddy Pugh is, he's the last he's the last man standing. He's the dean of Black college coaches at this point. He's been, since 2002, he's been the only one still in the same place that he started. And he's beloved by his players. He's beloved by Black college culture. His players love him. And, when you have an emotional meeting Thursday morning and your coach says, well, this is it, guys, let's send me out right, that team is going to be incredibly focused. And while South Carolina State has some questions offensively, that defense is not a question. If they can limit Jackson State's opportunities, they have a very good chance to win that game. Jackson State, I feel like, they can't get caught looking forward, because next week is the Orange Blossom with Florida A&M. And as badly as they want to, quiet the jibber jabber coming out of Tallahassee, they got to focus on this first. And I think they will be focused, but I still think South Carolina State, for now, has the better team. If this matchup was happening in November or December, I would pick Jackson State. But today, I'm picking South Carolina State.
Well, gentlemen, it's been a tremendous hour. I want to thank you all for taking a few minutes to talk to us about the upcoming college football season, especially as it relates to HBCUs. Kendrick Marshall, Chris Stevens, Jarrett Hoffman. I'm Kenn Rashad. Thank you all for taking a moment to watch. If you would, please hit the like button. And while you're at it, also hit the subscribe button to be alerted when new content is produced on our channel. I'm Kenn Rashad. I'll see you guys next time. Thanks for joining us.